Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Today we are building this tiny little M24 Chaffee from Foreart. I've always wanted a model of a Chaffee in 72nd scale, and finally Foreart has delivered a really good kit compared to other choices like the Revel 76th one. I would never touch that, so let's build this one and see just how good or bad it is. The construction starts with the lower hull, which is constructed in the bathtub form in this kit, which is always preferable to me because of course there are companies that are good enough to make the parts fit together perfectly and have it aligned, but sometimes these parts can struggle to align, so I think it's safer just to have a bathtub, and as you can see it looks pretty good. Then we can start gluing the details onto the hull. We start with the shock absorbers. These are really thin, so be careful, they are easy to break. But they slid into their spots very easily. The swing arms are separate pieces, which is always kind of an issue with these small kits, because it's hard to make them align perfectly, especially with such tiny pins. However, here it was easy enough, and I didn't have many or much problems with it. Just gotta be careful and make sure that they are all straight. The wheels also very simple assembly, is just two halves glued together. However, later on you will see that I replaced these with 3D printed wheels. This is because I lost one and I think a vacuum made it or something. The carpet monster claimed its victim. It had to happen eventually. I was very lucky with finding lost pieces. Now I didn't find it and had to replace it. As for the sprocket and idler, I didn't lose those, thankfully. They are very interestingly molded in this kit. As you can see, it's one big piece, which is good because you don't have to bother with aligning the teeth, and you know, that's always a plus. I mean, I sound like I'm incompetent and I can't line up stuff, but it's always easier if it's just done for you like this, especially in such a tiny scale. All things considered, the assembly went really easily. This is a great out-of-the-box weekend model. I know I could have improved it with details and stuff, but I just wanted to chill and I kind of let the model flow through my fingers and loose pieces of it. I didn't necessarily bother with any up detailing like textures and welds, because it would have been way too tiny in this scale. And again, I'm just making excuses, I suppose. I think everyone needs a simple out-of-the-box project sometimes. This kit included some pretty nice PE. It was very simple to bend, which I was really happy about because PE is pain. And the metal barrel as well, which was a great addition. I'm really happy that modern companies seem to hop on the bandwagon that I think Vespit started, where every single kit has a metal barrel, and I really appreciate that. I had a box of figures lying around, so I just took them out and decided which ones I would like to use on the model, because figures bring a tiny bit of life to the tank, in my opinion. I went for not this one. I tried this one, but he didn't work. At the end I settled for this fella sitting in the turret, because I think it fits the vibe. The 3D printed wheels came last because I was waiting for them, as I was testing some really cool stuff, which I can't wait to show you guys. I will do it soon because it's really exciting. For easier painting, I just glued the wheels to the hull later with super glue, and I assembled the tracks in such a way that I can remove them together with the sprocket and the idler, so it's easier to paint. Speaking of painting, let's get into that now. As always, the painting stage of the model starts with adding a primer. Now, primer is a sort of a rougher color which allows you to have your colors stick a little better to the surface, as the finish of the primer is a little rougher. It also ties all the different colors together. Here it's not that visible as I didn't add any welds, which would be yellow, and no texture which would be white or greyish, etc, etc, but it still ties the plastic with the PE, for example, and this makes it easier to add paint later without having to worry about differing shades. I covered the entire model in this paint. The one that I use here is Vallejo Mecha Primer, the black one, obviously, as you can see. There are many different primers. You have acrylic ones, enamel ones, I think. It really is up to you what you prefer. For me, acrylics are the best because they dry almost instantly. I just can't get used to having to wait days before stuff is dried. Which isn't necessarily true for primers, but there are other techniques later which I will show you where I find acrylics to work better for me personally. But, you know, I'm still a beginner and I gotta experiment. And experiment I did. One thing that I've never managed to do in a way that I would be satisfied with is a winter camouflage. I always struggled to keep the white white, I always struggled to make it interesting and look good. Today I decided to experiment with a special paint, but first what we need to do is base coat the model in a olive drab color because this is an American World War II vehicle. Now there are two types of colors that I use mainly. One of them is Atom colors and the other is AK Turgent acrylics. Both these paints are acrylic and they are really good because they are the newest sort of mixture that the companies developed, and they're easy to spray, they are really easy to thin, the surface is nice and matte, and they almost self-level even. Of course I use a acrylic thinner that has self-leveling properties. I generally just really enjoy these paints. Here you can see me, the base coat is olive drab from AK, the Turgent one. The next thing that I start doing on this model is some post shading. This is a technique that you could have seen me do basically on all of my models before on this channel. Essentially what it is making the paint job more interesting visually and lighter, because small models reflect less light so they appear darker than they actually are, so this way you can artificially lighten them. Essentially what post shading is adding thin layers of progressively lighter paints on highlighted areas. I always talked how I had a system of where to highlight when I am on a vertical piece of the model. I highlight towards the center, and when it's horizontal I highlight towards the upper parts, or the opposite. But I've been doing it lately in a way that doesn't actually have a specific way to do it. Or well, more so, the more models I build, the more I realize that it just doesn't apply perfectly. So you need to look into some references and stuff and just see what looks the best for you, essentially. This technique is used to make the model more interesting and contrasty. I must say that I am always really scared to apply enough contrast, and I usually don't use the full potential, so I've been trying to force myself to go further lately, but on this Chaffee I still hadn't done that. However, here the post shading became kind of useless at the end, but I was pretty happy with it. Now the reason I say that it became kind of useless is the winter camouflage that I wanted to apply, and I am using a very interesting paint for this. Now usually what you would do is apply a chipping fluid now, let it sit and then apply the white color and chip it down to create a winter whitewash effect. However, I never really had enough luck with this. I've noticed that these acrylic colors are sort of rubbery when they dry, And if you've seen my Stug 3 video, you might have noticed that what happened with the model was that instead of chipping the paint, I was sort of tearing down whole chunks of it in a sort of rubbery way. If you've seen those TikToks of people dipping a shovel with paint into a bucket of thinner and then tearing down the paint, that's exactly what was happening. And I know that I could have waited for the paint to dry more, and there are many techniques to make this work, and I would love to try them in the future, but this is something new that Mo did, and this is an atom color, but it's a washable color. This is atom washable white. Washable means that it is reactivatable with water, which makes it a little pretty useful for this kind of chipping stuff. And I wanted to see if it's usable for a winter whitewash. So what you can see me doing here is covering the entire surface with white, which is kind of a risky move considering I've never tried this, but I was trusting the process. Now after all this was dry, I took a stiff brush, dipped it into water and started scratching the surface. Now it didn't chip like it would with a chipping fluid. That's a thing you can't achieve with this, and that's not the winter whitewash I was going for. I was trying a heavily worn late winter whitewash, almost the last whitewash you would apply before taking it off and keeping the vehicle green for spring. And for that it worked remarkably pretty well. What the paint did was sort of wet itself. It was like you had a surface of wet paint and you just moved it around into corners. This left a thin sort of filter of white over the most worn areas, with the whitewash going into the crevices and staying there, which is almost exactly what would happen. And even though it's not perfect as a winter whitewash, I was still pretty happy with the result. It gave me the idea that these washable paints, because I never tried them, had some potential for dust and stuff like that. Now it wasn't completely perfect. I tried to fix it a little bit with some more paint afterwards, because I thought it took away a little too much paint, so I made some streaks with it and it worked pretty well for that as well. So I was decently happy with it, and I'm definitely gonna try using these washable paints in the future. I won't necessarily bore you with the tiny details. I used the same 3rd gen acrylics and atom acrylics as I did with the airbrush. They're perfect for the brush as well. And I just painted all the tiny details in different colors according to my references. I've been trying to figure out a way to consistently paint tracks well lately, and this model isn't the one that I figured it out on, but as you can see here, I used a very thin layer of a brown color over the black base coat, which created a sort of rusty effect, but it's not perfect. I still gotta figure it out a little bit better, but these are gonna get muddy anyway, so it's no big deal. After all the details were painted, I varnished the model with a flat varnish, which gave me a little bit of time to start painting the tiny little minifigure. Now, as you can see, I applied a zenithal highlight to it. If you don't know what the zenithal highlight is, it's essentially the black base, which you saw me spray at the beginning, and then I sprayed white from the top as if it was light falling onto the figure. And now with this being applied, I can start painting the figure itself. This highlight should allow me to create some fake shadows from underneath. Now, painting 1/72 scale figures is a lot of fun if you know what you're doing, and even more fun when you don't know what you're doing, which is what I'm doing here. One thing that I started doing recently, what I tried to do was originally I would paint the figure with skin tones and then lighten those skin tones, but that usually resulted in a almost white figure, which isn't necessarily what you want, I don't think. That's why I started painting my figures, at least the skin, in a base coat of a very dark, skinny color. It's NATO brown in this case. It works almost the best, I would say, and I just painted a very thin layer over the entire skin with while letting the zenithal highlight create fake shadows a little bit. Then with continuously lighter colors I started highlighting the face on the areas which would highlight. Now I don't necessarily know how to explain how I approach this. I've been drawing a lot, so it kinda comes just naturally, but if I had to explain it in simple terms, in 1 to 72nd scale you can essentially just dry brush the lighter colors on at first, and then the lightest colors can go onto the most highlighted parts, which would be your cheeks, your chin, nose, and the forehead, maybe the ears as well, but those are usually covered underneath some hair on these figures. Essentially that's what I do. First I sorta kinda dry brush it with the medium skin color, and then with the lightest ones I just pick up the tiny details, and then I go over it with a wash, but that will come later. For the uniform itself, I make sure I use the zenithal highlight as much as I can, because that brings me the best results. So just as with the first layer of the skin color, I apply the wash in a sort of filter, not the wash, the color. This way it shows the shadows from underneath. Then I do another layer of this, and afterwards I dry brush it with the lightest color, and that's essentially the uniform. I won't act like I know how to paint these figures perfectly, but I was pretty happy with this one. I think it's one of the best figures I've painted so far, but of course you will guys tell me what you think. With the flat varnish applied, I could finally start adding some pin wash to the model. Pin wash is essentially a technique where you highlight the shadows around the details, which makes them more pronounced and pop. Now with white vehicles you risk tinting the white towards the color of your wash. In this case it's the greenish color of a winter wash from AK, it's an enamel wash. Therefore what I did is I heavily diluted it and made sure it perfectly flew around the details without necessarily creating any layer of a wash over the detail and tinting it brown or stuff like that. I decided not to add any snow onto this model because it was white enough already. I actually really enjoy contrast, so if I'll make a snowy vehicle it'll probably just be purely green. And that's beside the point. I started adding normal muddy weathering onto it instead. As you can see, what I started with was a pre-dusting with a very light dusty color. It's an acrylic again, it's heavily diluted, so it goes over the surface nicely. I just added it everywhere that I would expect dust to accumulate, so over the entire running gear and behind the running gear, the tracks, stuff like that. Once that was done and dusted, no pun intended, I started adding some different color and textures in form of speckling. Now speckling is a very powerful method. It allows you to create very nice visual texture. It looks pretty realistic. Of course it could be controlled a little better than I did, but you know, we learn with every project that we make. I started layering the speckling on, starting with some lighter colors and then moving on into darker muddy colors. It's not the most complex technique, but it brings some pretty good results. Of course you could improve upon it, which is something I've been trying to do lately, but with this I was pretty happy with the result in general. I decided to make it a little more interesting, not just speckling, by adding some tactically placed mud, which is just really dark brown, and I placed it around the back of the mudguards, or where the mudguard meets the hull. Also towards the middle of the mud caps, because that's where the mud would accumulate and stay and would be the hardest to clean up from. It's a pretty cool detail. Also around the swing arms and where the mud would get thrown up by the sprocket. After repeating these techniques on the tracks themselves, the last thing to do was to pick out all of the metal surfaces that would collide with metal or with ground with some silver, and the model could be considered done. And we can go on to the Glamour Shots. So the model is done now, and I must say I am pretty happy with the result. I think for a whitewash, which is a thing that I always struggled with and I usually fucked up quite heavily, this looks pretty nice, all things considered. Of course, let me know down in the comments what you think about this model. I must say, for a basically brand new company that I've never heard of, Foreart, I'm really pleased with the model, and I hope they will continue to put out some really interesting stuff. I know they made a HIMARS system, which isn't really my cup of tea, but I'm sure some people would enjoy it, and if you really want a HIMARS, I encourage you to get it from Foreart, because the company is really good, and if the HIMARS is as good as this Chaffee, you will be very pleased. Anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. The washable colors really are something to experiment with, and you will see me experiment with in the future. Otherwise, thank you all for watching this video. Stay tuned for other videos. If you would like to see those, please give me a like, subscribe, maybe comment down below, and I will see you in the future with some more exciting stuff. So have a nice rest of your day, and thank you for watching.